Small town redditors, what's the weirdest unsolved crime in your town, old or new? I found out my grandma played cards with the mob in a liquor store basement. I was reading a news article on a cold case from the former owner disappearing for an English assignment and my grandma kinda just frowned. Told me she used to play cards with him and never paid his debts. About 30 years ago, a refuse worker found the badly burned body of an 18-month-old boy amongst the bags and recycling. Forensics deduced that due to the condition of his liver he'd died less than a week before his body was found. Hospital and medical records were used to establish that nobody in the county was missing a child. He doesn't have a name on his gravestone. Edit. It was in Cumbria, England. The police likely didn't retain a DNA sample. Or we might have heard something about familial DNA by now. The local police aren't very good. Look up the case of Poppy Worthington as an example. Most local people assume he died of SIDS. Then his parents panicked and tried to conceal his body. Whoever did it must have had an element of local knowledge in order to know where to put the corpse. Story from my grandpa. Small farm town Nebraska is in the 60s. A guy was found burnt alive in his car. Hands wire tied to the steering wheel. It ruled as a suicide. Most of the town assumed that the guy owed gambling debts to some mob in Chicago or the like. And the guy wasn't exactly loved in the small town, so there was no real looking into it. 1973, my 4th grade buddy, Guy Heckle, disappeared during a Boy Scout camping trip. They found his coat. That was all. Not another clue after all these years. When I was a teenager, there was a spate of rude graffiti in my quiet, boring town of under 30,000 people. It was all obviously being done by the same person, as all the D's were drawn in a very unique style and they were all signed Frisbee, with the Z's written in a distinctive way. There didn't seem to be any pattern of where they would strike either. Every week or so, a new one would appear, on the wall outside the social club, in the highway underpass, inside the fish and chip shop toilet, etc. It got to a point where kids at school would keep track of where the latest Frisbee had appeared and it would be all anyone could talk about. In a way, they were the proto-Banksy. Everyone wanted to know their true identity, including the police. Since our town had practically no crime other than the odd stolen bicycle, the cops had the time and resources to come down hard on this one. It was, and still is, a solidly conservative town. So no doubt they were under pressure too from the local council to quickly address this shocking moral depravity and prevent the appearance of further enormous, stylized, ejaculating cocks around town. They went around the schools, including the elementary primaries, and interviewed bunches of kids looking for any clues that might lead them to the mysterious Frisbee. Supposedly, they checked the school registration books and paid particular attention to any kid who had a name that might reasonably lead to a nickname of Frisbee. And we all swore that we saw more police cars driving around than usual that summer, looking to catch the mystery artist in the act. As far as I know, they never did get him or her. The graffiti just stopped appearing as suddenly as it started. Nor did we kids ever find out who it was. There were tons of theories, of course, with a lot of suspicion falling on a kid called Charlie in the year above me because apparently he liked to doodle decent balls on his notebooks. However, he was subsequently cleared by some girl called Debbie who sat next to him in French, and she sneaked a peek at his doodles one day and she reported that the vein structure running down Charlie's shaft was intrinsically different from that of Frisbee's and therefore not a match. TLDR, someone went around town drawing massive sklongs. Police spared no expense trying to catch the perpetrator but never did. Back in 2001, a friend of my friend had been secretly chatting online with a guy from Canada. They had made plans to meet up in Windsor or Detroit. A few days later, her body was found dumped in the woods. After doing some digging, police got a hold of the Canadian guy. He said he went to meet her, but she never showed, so he assumed she had stood him up. His story checked out. One suspect was this coworker, but a few months later he did a murder-suicide to his mom, so they could never get the truth out of him. It's been a cold case ever since. Edit. This was her coworker, not Canada, guys. She would have traveled 7-8 hours to meet the guy in Detroit, Windsor, assuming she even made it out of town. Nowhere near the scale of disappearing children or Nazi collaborators, But my hometown's biggest mystery is who keeps sitting in the holes at the golf course. Person has been doing it for more than 20 years. Every 2-3 months, there's a hole that's been shat in. Man got kicked out of a bar 3 years ago this December and went missing. Nobody has come forward with tips at all. He went missing from a fairly busy part of town too. Pretty recent, January this year. I'm in a village so it's even smaller. I live right next to a river, and one day after rain my grandpa went searching for snails, but he found a head still with some flesh. A neighbor had also found an arm around the same time. The police were called. They found the body and a few dogs chewing on it, but it was in a bag hanging from a tree above the river. At first it was assumed it was from the big city thrown into the river, but no, it's hanging from the damn tree. The weirdest thing is that the woman was not from the village itself. Where I grew up they found a dude who was buried under the cement in a building. No history or information about him. It's clear that he got into some deep trouble with someone. So, picture a time when all car doors and house doors were opened with a metal lock and key. Our community was in a forest park and was almost exclusively made up of Fed employees and their families. Maybe a few concessionaries and contractors. We're talking about a residential community of less than 200 people. Before webcams or ring cams were a thing and before Wi-Fi was possible. Come to think of it, it's still not possible in this location. With that stage set, one morning, I go out to my work vehicle and groggily put my key in the door and meet resistance. Wah. Ha. Look down. There's sticky paper on the lock. My key pushed through it but now I have sticky paper in the lock. Grrrr. Get out my pocket knife and clean it out. Go about my day. Get a radio from my SO later that day and the same thing happened to him. More people show up from our neighborhood and most of them had the exact same scenario. Okay, we think someone is playing a prank. Next morning, go out and there's a round sticker on my lock again. Frustrated, peel it off. Key in. Turn key. Rinse repeat. This continues for 2 solid weeks. It's harmless, right? Wheel. Some people aren't really looking every morning. A few vehicles get enough paper and adhesive in the door lock that it's getting harder to open the doors. We clean them out and these stickers just keep popping up. We lecture every employee and ask them to keep an eye on their vehicles. The stickers seem to appear every night. Gotta be human. But most people move through our area so it's not a visitor. We start talking to the teens. Guys, this isn't funny. If you know who's doing it, tell them to stop because it's property damage. Teens swear they're innocent. We decided that enough was enough and used a trail cam to catch the miscreant. 8:23 p.m. 13-year-old child A comes out with the family dog and child B who is 4. 4-year-old has a roll of garage sale. Stickers in her overalls pocket. Every car she passes. Boop. Sticker on the lock. All the way down the row of cars. Boop. Boop. 13-year-old is 5-10 feet ahead. Watching the dog and picking up dog waste. Doesn't even really notice. We named her the Sticker Bandit. Felt like the most evil supervillain taking her stickers away. A girl in my town went missing and the cops just did nothing and refused to make an arrest despite the evidence. She had a shaky and very abusive relationship with her boyfriend. One night after they broke up again, he and his friend stopped by her and her parents' house, saying he wanted to talk to her in his car. She agreed and the 3 of them left. She hadn't been seen since, but her ex and his friend had been seen in town acting like nothing happened. Their parents reported her missing and stated that their daughter's ex and his friend were last seen with her. The police didn't make an arrest and didn't investigate. It's been many years. I can't tell how long. I estimate about 4 years or more. Rumors spread like they always do. Rumors of her being sold as a sex slave. Rumors of her being murdered and either being buried somewhere or fed to pigs. No one knows what really happens, except the ex and his friend. This year the friend was found dead with a gunshot to the head. The bullet went straight through. If I remember correctly, it was ruled as a murder, but the rumor of suicide has been going around. Some say that the ex shot the friend because the friend was gonna snitch due to guilt. I think the ex is arrested now for the murder of his friend, but I could be wrong. There is a $2,000 reward for anyone who finds the missing girl. The family just wants closure. I remember seeing the father's truck covered in his daughter's picture trying to get the word out there. Cindy Tig Rivera, if you are reading this, your parents haven't given up. I still see your signs plastered all over town. They miss you so much. Police officer in 1930s responded to a call around midnight on Christmas Day. The wife woke up and he told her he'd be back, only that he had disappeared entirely and did not come home. The car was found abandoned with no indication of his whereabouts. The local theory is that he was murdered and his body was disposed of in the leather tanning factory. Late 90s. A natural gas compressor station was built next door to me. Entire neighborhood protested it hard, but we were just dumb farmers, and gas companies have money. Shortly after it was built, in the middle of the night, it sprung a leak. Compressed gas spewed into the air like a geyser and there was now a jet black cloud next door. Not that I could see much anyway at that hour. The sound it made was so loud, it would make a foghorn sound like a squeaky toy. Anyway, we evacuated, got to the other side of town to some family and watched the news. Apparently it ended quickly enough. They estimated $13 million worth of natural gas was shot into the environment. So we go back. Reporters talk to my dad and stuff. Then two men show up, hand something to each news company, and everyone leaves immediately. My family and my neighbors are standing there like WTF. Where did the reporters go? Within the hour, it was no longer on the news. If you Google it, you'll find no trace of it. They just made that story disappear. Yes. My family is from the small town where a prominent cult founder was born. A town of about 1,000. Back 25-30 years ago, my uncle was on city council when the cult came to town and offered boatloads of money to build a shrine and improve infrastructure. They didn't have the bad reputation at that point quite yet that they do now. The majority of city council was drooling over the cash, but my uncle 12 angry men at the situation. Seeing the writing on the wall that this was a step off a cliff to becoming overrun. One of the people he never convinced was the sheriff, but he still got his numbers. Unfortunately, he would receive harassing phone calls every night and would frequently have cars parked outside his house at odd hours. Everyone knows everyone. Population 1,000. Remember. And these were not locals. It came to a head when his house got broken into and letters were left threatening my aunt and cousins, who were young children at the time. Status got involved, and the behavior immediately stopped. Few days later the cultists packed up and left. Officially, the threats and break-in were never solved, though every once in a while they would still get odd phone calls and blank letters in the mail. Yay, anthrax scare. Unofficially, everyone knows. A few years later my uncle and family moved out into the country, and all the harassment stopped. Not exactly small town, but small compared to the region. There was a house that burned down 3 times in the span of a decade. I remember hearing lots of rumors about divorces and revenge, gang activity, being cursed. Not sure if it was ever solved. Just about the only unsolved crime in my town is the mystery of the missing bicycle. There were 2 reported stolen, but one owner found his. The other one, never to be seen again. A few years ago in my town an old man was sitting in his car at 5 AM, waiting for the newspapers for his route to be dropped off. He was parked on the main street, but it would have been empty that early in the morning. It was a warm summer morning so he had his window open. As he waited someone rolled up on a bike and whacked him multiple times in the face with a machete and rode off. The old guy was able to drive himself to the hospital and ended up being physically fine, despite some pretty horrific looking wounds, but the attacker was never found. This was a few years ago and there has been zero follow-up. It's one of those inexplicable things that stuck with for the last few years since it happened. Who would do something like that? I have to assume it was somebody high on something. I hope he or she, let's face it, likely he gets what's coming to him. 2 bodies were found on my island in SE Asia in the last 24 hours. One was found in the jungle after being there for a year in an apparent motorbike accident, the other washed up on the beach. I live in Mexico, so my hometown has a lot of unsolved crimes. As an example, my great uncle was hacked to death at his ranch. Everyone knows why. Everyone knows who. No one will say anything for the foreseeable future. It's organized crime. If it weren't clear already. Wit. Nah, ducked up. Yup. 100 feet from the house I lived in at the time, a little boy was hit by a car in broad daylight. Killed him instantly. The town rallied and tried to find the person that did it for months. Was all over Facebook, newspapers. Had a 500k reward for information. Whole town knows who it was. Not even a question. Still set as an unsolved crime even though the person responsible had their truck washed and cleaned professionally and fixed by the local body shop. For the record, he is a judge, so yay. The crime was solved, but why it happened is still unknown. I live down the road from a small store. A guy walked in there, shot the girl behind the counter, and then himself. They were complete strangers to each other. It's been 4 years. And still no one knows why he did it. The road was renamed after her. Many years ago, a house up the street from us burnt down. By the time firefighters got there, it was completely engulfed and a new home would have to end up being built. The man who lived there set it ablaze on purpose not long before going upstairs and shooting himself. Although his house was in complete destruction, with the fire yet to be put out, nobody expected him to be alive. This turned out to be true, but what they weren't expecting was that his body wasn't burned at all. The flames had avoided his body completely. It's unsolved because no one really knows why he killed himself or what the purpose was of burning down his house in the process. It's also a mystery as to how the fire didn't reach him. TLDR, man killed himself after setting his home on fire, with no one knowing why. A retired known criminal that did heists in the 80s and 90s. Killed by one bullet in the back of his head. In his apartment on the main street, silencer was used. It was at night. He died on his armchair. Unfortunately, there are 2 unsolved missing children cases from the 90s here. They still put up signs and articles in the newspaper every year around the date the kids went missing. I don't think they're related, but who knows? In 2003 in my hometown, someone decided to burn down a playground. This was in a very small rural town. The nearest playground aside from that one was 15 miles away. This playground was decent sized too. And I believe it was made possible by a donation from someone in town. It was mostly wood with rubberized mesh, steel bars, and large plastic slides. Nobody ever figured out who did it. Probably too late to be seen. But my small town used to host a large bike race. Literally hundreds of cyclists riding around the park's 3/4 mile loop track. Maybe some road racing as well. Can't remember. Anyway, the large gathering required all the police force to be on hand. And with the jam of cars, bicycles, and people, it was really hard to get in or out. A bank robber dressed in full cyclist gear came into a bank just a block away from the park, robbed them blind, and then hopped on his getaway bicycle and rode into the crowd at the park. By the time the police could respond, B was in the mix of people, and to this day no one has ever been charged. Perfect crime. My small town doesn't have a homeless problem. We have a strangely common occurrence of homeless people walking at night, drunk, and falling asleep or hitting their heads and passing out on train tracks. It's strange. Like everyone that is homeless in the town just falls asleep on the tracks then gets run over by a train. So yay. Virtually zero homeless people ever. The unsolved Delphi in murders of those 2 poor kids, Abby and Libby. Small town, very rural, population about 20,000, very peaceful, subject of some famous landscape paintings. Bag of human bones found in the river this year. Still no one knows who they are or who did it. So not exactly from a small town, but is baffling. Happened this year. A man rented a room at a guest house. When he left, the host went to go prepare the room for the next occupant. The room was covered in blood. In the shower there was a chair with a pool of blood. It is assumed the person died in the chair. So the baffling part is that there is a camera trained in the room's door. The man entered and left alone without a speck of blood on him. The authorities assumed the blood belonged to a woman whose chopped up body was found in a nearby dam. Blood tests came back and it dosed. The murder of Amanda Goodman. She was a well-liked preteen girl. She was shot in the head on her way home from school and laid under a tree. Whoever killed her rested her head on top of a paper cup so it wouldn't be touching the ground and laid her as if she were asleep. Some people here think she knew or saw something she shouldn't have and was about to tell police. There are no suspects and I think the case is about 30 years old now. It's very suspicious because it was someone who cared about the condition of her body. It's never gotten any big media attention but I've always desperately wanted answers. Not exactly in my small town, but in the desert outside of it. In July of 2019, a man, age not listed, and his wife, 69 years, decided to take a 2-mile hike in the Mojave Desert. This wasn't unusual for them as they frequently explored this area, according to the husband. On the way back to their camper from the hike, the husband stated that he stopped to take a photograph while his wife continued ahead to the camper. The husband then claimed that was the last he saw of her. He arrived at the camper to find it still locked with his wife nowhere to be found. He searched the area for her before deciding to contact 911. The wife was wearing a bikini, baseball cap, and hiking boots and didn't have any supplies or cell phone on her at the time. At the time she went missing, temperatures in the area were exceeding 100 F, 38 C. A search was launched and the husband was named a suspect in the disappearance of his wife. Approximately 18 months after her disappearance, her body was found deceased in the Mojave Desert near Essex, California. An autopsy was done, but the cause of death was not announced. The wife's family members suspect foul play in her disappearance and death. Here's a link to the full story. 2010, middle school age boy thought he was messaging an older woman that he liked online. They agreed to meet up in the woods one night right beside our town's high school. Next morning they found his body mangled and sexually abused. I think they still haven't caught the guy. Sorry, nope. I was wrong. Looks like they actually caught him in 2014 and was charged in 2018. Still one of the most disgusting and shocking things our town has bared witness to, though. I grew up in a small Midwestern town directly off an interstate. A convenience store worker right off the exit was shot and killed by some random person. Almost 20 years ago by now. The person escaped by exiting down the interstate right away, and nobody has ever been able to identify them. Sad plus, several customers came in after the shooting and walked away with free stuff because they couldn't see the dead woman behind the counter. They thought the store was abandoned. IDK about Unsolved exactly, but my town was made famous by John Grisham, who wrote The Innocent Man. Basically, the cops got sick of investigating and pinned the crime on 2 guys who didn't do it. I haven't read the book or seen the show, so IDK if they know who actually did it. But yeah, Ada, okay, itty town with ittier cops and the ittiest justice system. Not sure if Arlington TX counts as small. I mean, it is smaller than Fort Worth and Dallas. But the one that stands out is 8-year-old Amber Hageman's abduction and murder. She was out riding bikes and someone in a black pickup got her into his truck and took off. They found her body in a creek a few days later, and of course the water washed away any potential DNA evidence. It's been 25-26 years now and the killer hasn't been found. The Amber Alert is named for her. That's an alert that goes out whenever a child is abducted. There was a woman who died 6-7 years ago. They found her in the snow, an abandoned dirt road, naked. This was in the night, and nobody know that what she does here. Somebody raped her, and she is frozen. Nobody know who done this, but the cops not investigate so long time. They are closed the case. In 1999, 2 teenage girls left to go to a party, ended up in different town, called home to say they would be late, and never came home. The car was found the next day on the side of the road. Their bodies were in the trunk, both shot at point blank range. An arrest was made a couple years ago, but thanks to COVID, court cases are backlogged, so still waiting on that. They were a year younger than me, so needless to say it really stuck with me over the years. Back in 1903 a local woman poisoned many members of her family, including a baby over a few months. She served time and died but never really admit to a motive. One theory is that she really liked attending Irish funerals. Kind of a strange one, but the whole potted plant supply at a nearby store, similar to Kroger, went missing a year back, and nobody knows what happened to them. Nice try. I'll never fold coppers osa osa. Next town over from me. Kathy Page was murdered in May 1991. In Vida TX. Police totally screwed up the whole deal and the killer wasn't arrested. Years later, her dad started putting up billboards calling out the husband as her murderer and that the police are corrupt. There are still billboards there.